tonight. So tonight we've got Brendan Malone joining us. Um, for those of you who don't know Brendan, he is a pro-life educator and trainer and um, teaches a lot. He's like, how would I describe Brendan? This is putting me on the spot. Um, I think he's like the most educated person on pro-life topics and training in New Zealand. And we're so thankful to have him as part of our Voice for Life team, but also as able to join us here tonight. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Brendan. Now, I guess
recording in progress.
Part of the kind of background to this particular webinar was just as we've been more active on our social media and stuff, we've been seeing people having conversations just around incrementalism versus abolitionism and what we should be saying, what should we be doing, or is saying, oh, we're not doing enough or we're doing too much, or, there's just lots of different perspectives. And we thought it would be a really great opportunity to have a webinar to discuss, those topics in general and just have some dialogue and conversation. And so here we are tonight. Brendan's going to talk through those, different ideas, and then we'll also open up for questions and answers at the end, and really keen to hear you guys' perspectives on it as well. So fire away, Brendan. Feel free to introduce yourself better because I'm clearly not thinking very straight.
Thank you, Lydia, for that introduction. I'll try and live up to what you said is very kind. I'm not sure if I am the most knowledgeable, but I get by. Just by way of introduction, I'm Brendan Malone, for those who don't know me, married, father of 5, based in the South Island, the beautiful sunny and sometimes windy Rangiora. And I have been working full-time in the pro-life space now for almost 21 years. It'll be 21 years actually in a couple of weeks' time. So that's a little bit about me and my background. A big part of my work is obviously, as Lydia has already mentioned, in the education space, which means practically traveling, presenting at events, churches, schools, conferences, universities. Before cancel culture really took off, the pro-life movement was one of the first to really experience cancel culture, but before that took off, I was making quite regular appearances at New Zealand universities to engage with people who were pro-choice, often majority pro-choice audience actually, on these particular issues. And obviously many of you will be familiar with the Activate Pro-Life Training Week, which myself and a couple of other really amazing pro-lifers had the privilege of starting back in, I think we're now 15 years almost. It's been a while, but it's been a while. Please forgive me for my if I'm a little bit hazy tonight. I've just come back into work this week after 2 weeks off with the flu. I'm into my 3rd week. I'm still in the tail of it. And I managed to get a bit of vertigo and dizziness last week. So I'm on the tail end of that. It's not quite as bad, but I'm still not 100%. So please forgive me if things are not up to the usual high standard. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to put on my presentation. I'll move to the side of the screen and you'll be able to see my slides. And I'm just going to deliver the presentation, make my points, and then we're going to have time. We'll open the floor for questions and for conversation and dialogue, because I think that is always one of the most fruitful things that you can do in these kinds of situations. So let me just flick on the slides now and see how that goes. And look at that. I've already got a problem because I moved that before. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So the topic tonight is obviously abolitionism versus incrementalism. Is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? And hopefully giving people a little bit of a background and understanding of the distinctions here. What we're going to do to start with is I'm going to start with some definitions of the two positions that are adopted by different people within the pro-life movement. And then what I want to do is I want to move on from there to I guess I want to get into the weeds a little bit and look at perhaps some nuance and some points that I think are worthy of our consideration. And then I want to actually sort of wrap things up in part 3 by just asking what I think is a very pertinent question about what is often framed as a debate, or often can be a debate, between two sides within the pro-life movement. and give some concluding remarks before we have some time for questions. So let's start with some definitions. And we'll start first with abolitionism. And I want to just warn you that I may have to put on these glasses at some point. I'm trying to keep them off because the glare is a bit high when I put them on. But if I have to, apologies if the glare kicks up as a result of that. So abolitionism, first of all. This is just a basic summary. It doesn't go into all the details. We're not going to get into necessarily particular groups who would identify themselves. One of the obvious ones you may or may not have heard of is a group called Abolish Human Abortion, but there are others as well. But I just want to give a quick summary of both sides and their positions. So first of all, abolitionism basically is the idea that there should be nothing but support for the immediate and total end of all legal abortion. And I've also put in there now euthanasia, I think, as well, because euthanasia has now been legalized. It is now part of the conversation as well. But abolitionism and the pro-life movement is still primarily something associated with the issue of abortion, and that's certainly where it began. As I said, the idea being that an abolitionist is someone who would say that we shouldn't settle for anything less than the immediate and total end of all legal abortion. Or if the issue was euthanasia, then it would be the same for that issue as well. Now, there may or may not be internal disagreement within certain sectors of the abolitionist community about whether or not there should be an exception for saving the life of the mother. Some say a hard no. Others say that that could be an exception that they would consider. And the other thing about abolitionism that I think is important to know is that it may or may not be religious in nature, but generally it has quite a strong Christian moral character. It certainly rests quite strongly on quite solid tenets and foundations of the Christian scriptures and the Christian tradition in making its case. And that would generally be the norm for people who are involved in abolitionism. It takes its name, for those who may be familiar with the word, from the slavery abolitionism movement. And so it sees itself as sort of being a parallel, but obviously in the pro-life space regarding abortion. So pro-life, not the pro-life space regarding slavery, but the pro-life space regarding abortion. And the most famous probably of the abolitionists, I think this would be fair to say, there are a few of them, but the most famous would probably have to be William Wilberforce. And it's not uncommon to see pro-life anti-abortion abolitionists referencing William Wilberforce. Incrementalism. Well, incrementalism, as the name would suggest, is support for the end to abortion and, again, now euthanasia as well, through incremental change. So it's not necessarily fighting for an immediate and total cessation of abortion. It's about trying to get to that place by getting there in increments. Incremental, as the dictionary tells us, is something occurring over a series of gradual increments or small steps. So the idea is it's about taking steps forward towards the goal of ending abortion, and an incrementalist is willing to support smaller steps along the way to actually get there. So they are willing to work their way towards an end to abortion by supporting gradual reductions, for example, when it comes to something like abortion law or availability. There may be internal disagreement about which incremental strategies have merit. Incrementalists are not all of the same mind. I think probably it would be fair to say that within incrementalism, which is the majority and the mainstream pro-life position on the issue of abortion, and I think probably euthanasia as well, make of that what you will. That's not making a statement about the other side, but that's just the reality of it. There may be internal disagreement about which incremental strategies have merit, though, that incrementalists are not all in agreement. It's not unusual to have incrementalists who, at any given time, would have different ideas about what the next step should be in that process. It may or may not be religious in nature. I think probably it's fair to say that if you compared abolitionism with incrementalism, you'd probably find that there is more people who would not have a particular religious affiliation at all, who are pro-life, who would sit within the incrementalist camp rather than the other way around. Euthanasia is a more stark example in this regard, because Euthanasia, I think part of the reason why is that euthanasia is a very, very recent legal change, the legalization of euthanasia. And in my experience in working in that space as well, there seems to be a lot more people in the euthanasia space who don't have any religious affiliation whatsoever. But in abortion, I think the tendency would still be that you would have people of the Christian tradition predominantly who would be pro-life. In the United Kingdom, I know that it's not unusual to have Muslims on the front line as well of the pro-life cause, but generally in a place like New Zealand and other Western nations, you would find that it is Christians, and understandably so, because the Christian tradition is the one which upholds the sacred dignity of every individual human life and has from the very beginning had opposition to abortion and seen it as a failure to love neighbour and a serious violation of respecting the Imago Dei, the image of God that every person is, and their human dignity, which stems from that. Now, within the pro-life movement, the two camps are often divided against one another regarding which approach is the most moral and or effective. Generally, and I don't think this is unfair to say, I think that the abolitionist camp, and certainly in my experience anyway, the claim that they would make is they believe their position to be the most moral of the two positions. I think in the incrementalist camp, I think generally what I've experienced is that people would say that they think that that might be the more effective of the two strategies. They don't say their position is immoral or anything like that, but I think they would tend to put the emphasis on the belief that they think it's a more effective way of trying to achieve change, whereas the abolitionist camp would put the emphasis on the morality of the way the change is actually achieved. Now, the abolitionist camp, I don't think, well, certainly in my experience, they wouldn't necessarily say that they think that theirs is a more effective strategy, but what I have heard and read a lot from within the abolitionist camp is the idea that they believe that the current incrementalist approach is not effective. Often you'll hear people from within the abolitionist camp saying that they don't think it's working. And they wouldn't necessarily say they think their position is more effective, but they would say, well, the current situation is not working, so why not abolitionism in a sense? This particular divide is really most pronounced in the United States. I'll come back to that point because I think it's important when we consider the local scene here in New Zealand or others who might be in other parts of the world outside of America. But it is a very, very pronounced divide at times and can actually get quite toxic. And I don't think that's a good thing. And we'll come back to that towards the end. So with that and sort of basic framework, and hopefully I've been fair to both sides. As I said, it's a basic summary. I don't want us to take all night, and there's different things that we could have unpacked a little bit more, but hopefully that gives the sort of basic overview. With that basic overview, I want us in part 2 to think about what I think are some points worthy of our consideration. And in no particular order. I've tried to structure this in a systematic way, so hopefully it actually is coherent and makes some sense, and there's a bit of flow here. But first of all, not all incremental proposals are sound. So just because someone is proposing something that might incrementally change, and obviously that change would be claimed to be an improvement to the current situation we find ourselves in, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually a sound proposal at all. There are incremental strategies out there that just are not realistically workable or wouldn't actually achieve what people necessarily might think they would achieve, or you might have a situation whereby an incremental strategy might actually effectively almost be a paper tiger where, okay, even if you were managed to actually achieve that strategy and successfully make that incremental change, people might just find other ways of working around it. So not all incremental proposals are sound. So I think hopefully that's obvious to people, but I think that is a point worth making. There are also secondary legal issues that I think are separate to incrementalism and or abolitionism. Apologies, by the way, if you can hear noise. It's just started to rain here and it might get a little bit fierce from the sound of things. So if you hear that noise, there's a bit of a rainstorm starting outside. But there are secondary legal issues that are separate to both incrementalism and or abolitionism. Sometimes they sort of get dragged into the debate. But one very clear example, I think, in this regard would be that of parental notification laws. So when it comes to the issue of abortion, there are there are really three options in this regard. One is that the law says that no parental notification whatsoever is required. That's the current situation in New Zealand. What that means is that anyone under the age of 16 can actually be taken away for an abortion via, for example, something like a school counsellor. So no notification whatsoever. The second tier of legislation would be parental notification, which means the parents simply have to be notified that that is happening. And the third and obviously highest of all would be parental consent. So it's not simply a matter of notifying parents. Parents actually have to give their consent for children to be taken off for abortions. And there is sometimes a debate that can arise within pro-life circles where people would say, well, if you support a parental notification law, which says that parents either at the very least have to either be notified or they have to give their consent, one of the two, then what you're doing is you're giving your legal support to abortion, because what you're saying is you're okay with abortion as long as it takes place that way. That is not a fair or sound moral position, and it's certainly not a fair or sound characterization of that particular stance. First thing to say about parental notification laws is the best research we have from overseas is they actually do have a limiting effect on abortion. Once again, if people know there is going to be, even I think particularly young people, if they know there's going to be a certain degree of accountability, there tends to be a reduction in the number of abortions. But leaving that point aside about efficacy, when someone supports a parental notification law, the thing that they are supporting there is not a question of, do I support abortion or not? The question is, do I support parental rights versus a situation where the state is able to have agents of the state effectively come into the family home and conduct moral actions with my children that I, as their parent, do not actually want happening or do not give my consent to, and that these actions can be done in secret without even me, the parents, who obviously have the first and most important responsibility to raise, nurture, care for, and educate their own children, without us even knowing about that. So that's often sort of dragged into these kinds of debates, but in actual fact, I'd argue that's a classic example of like a secondary issue, because the debate really at the heart of that, the moral and legal question, is really one of parental and family rights, rather than one about the question of abortion per se. And obviously it's tied up with abortion. And what that means is that someone can quite legitimately support a parental notification law, but they are doing that not intending and certainly not giving their consent to the idea that abortion's okay as long as you have parental consent. So I think that's important to be aware of. There can be secondary issues around this as well. I think in this regard, I think voting is one of these separate issues. I've known people who would really be in favour of abolitionism. However, when it comes to voting, they will often take a slightly different stance. And when you think about something like voting and voting for candidates, it's not really a question of incrementalism. You might find yourself in a situation where you have for example, no pro-life candidate to choose from whatsoever, or the only pro-life candidate is in such a minor party position that there's just no way of them getting across the line. And there might also be a scenario in which there might be one of the parties is proposing to liberalise even further the abortion laws in your country. Now, it'd be pretty hard to imagine how much worse things could get in New Zealand, but so we're pretty liberal already. But if you imagine a scenario where there might be an election where there is the possibility of one of the parties talking about further liberalising the abortion law, and you've got a situation where none of the candidates on offer actually are pro-life. None of them are staunchly abolitionist, for example, against abortion. But you might have one candidate who's absolutely in favour of the liberalisation in a major party, and another candidate who says that while they are not pro-life, or while they're not an abolitionist, they don't believe in abolishing abortion, they absolutely are not going to be supporting the liberalisation law. And in a situation like that, a person would, in good conscience, could go into a voting booth and vote for that candidate who is going to limit the evil, even though the candidate doesn't agree fully with the good of the pro-life position and doesn't necessarily want to see the total abolition of the evil itself. Their commitment to limiting the evil and the diabolical effects of that evil within a society obviously would allow a person in good conscience, if they wanted to to actually vote for that person. Equally, a person in good conscience could say, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to get behind any candidate who supports abortion whatsoever. But I think voting, for example, is a separate issue. And I've known people who sit more in an abolitionist camp who have made that kind of decision where they've voted to limit the evil in the polling booth. Not all restrictive change is authentic incrementalism. And I think this is really, really important to note. So just because a particular proposal might be or might result in the restriction of a very liberal abortion law, for example, like we have in this country, let's say an incremental change was proposed that would actually place restrictions that don't presently exist and would actually put limits on the scope of abortion and the number of human lives that are being lost to that evil. Support for that might not be incrementalism, even though it's like a restrictive change that seems incremental. What do I mean by that? Well, our intention really matters in this regard. And one of the things for authentic incrementalism to be authentically incrementalism is there has to be an intention that this incremental change is not the final step in the chain. If our intention is, I will support an abortion law that limits abortions after 20 weeks, so no abortion after 20 weeks, which would be obviously a massive improvement on the current situation. And if I said that's all I support and I don't want any further changes, even though there's been a change to the law, there's been an incremental step forward, that would not be authentic pro-life incrementalism. That is me just supporting a different version of the abortion law, which allows some abortion. Why? Because there's no forward momentum in my intention. I don't mean for this incremental step to be just the next step along a continuing journey towards a decrease and a further restriction of abortion. So incrementalism, to be authentically incrementalism, is always about forward momentum. It's not settling for a halfway house law. And I think that's important because sometimes that issue does get confused. And sometimes I think abolitionists can be unfair in their critical evaluation of incrementalists by saying that they actually just support slightly less abortion rather than an end to abortion. No, incrementalism is about moving towards that end, and that's really, really important to keep in mind. So it's not just about saying, well, we'll have a less liberal abortion law. It's about recognizing that this is supporting a change that is moving and is intended to keep moving forward. So after this increment will come another. Now, an individual person might not be in any position whatsoever to see through or achieve that next incremental step after the first one. It might be that they are getting on in years and they just are not, don't have the strength, or maybe they won't be around for that part of the fight. It might be that the current cultural situation is such that it is up to a whole new generation to spend a whole another decade or 2 or 3 or whatever it takes to actually fight to achieve that next incremental change. That's not the point. But as long as the intention is that we're not just settling for a halfway house, we are incrementally moving towards less and less and less abortion. So less lives being lost, less violence in our society. Incremental strategies absolutely can save human lives. And I think this is important to keep in mind. They absolutely can. The simple reality is that if it is harder to access abortion, then there definitely will be less of it. So an incremental change which brings in a restriction, which makes abortion not as easily accessible and not as widely available, is obviously going to save human lives. It's one step in the journey, but those strategies can, if they are prudent, and as I said, not all incremental strategies are necessarily prudent, so they wouldn't necessarily achieve that outcome, so they wouldn't be worthy of our support. But if they are prudent incremental strategies, they absolutely can save human lives. And one other thing I think is worthy of our consideration, and I think most people here would have no problem accepting this, but in our current cultural context, there's a great mythology, a great lie that is told about the law. And people suggest that the law is effectively irrelevant. This is a liberal dishonesty, and it really does stem from a urban legend that has made its way into the public consciousness. And this is the idea that legal prohibitions on particular actions, they don't work. And this mythology goes right back to the time of alcohol prohibition in the United States in the 1920s. And for whatever reason, it crept into the popular consciousness, the popular imagination, that alcohol prohibition didn't achieve anything positive, that it didn't actually make any positive change, and that all that resulted was just a whole new series of criminal gangs who started up. The claim is often made that it gave rise to gangs and their trade in illegal liquor, and lots of violence and everything else ensued. And so it didn't work. It just created negative outcomes. Those claims are simply not true. And we've known that for decades, actually. But for whatever reason, this myth persists. Prohibition did actually achieve positive things. And one of the things we know is the best available academic evidence and research we have indicates that prohibition was able to achieve somewhere between a 30 to 50% reduction in the consumption of alcohol in America at the time. Yes, there were people who went to speakeasies and drank underground, but in actual fact, 30 to 50% of people actually did curb their drinking as a direct result of that law change. Now, if you had a public health program which could achieve that kind of positive impact, it would absolutely be lauded in the modern era. And you saw that in the fruit of what happened. You saw a massive reduction, a very statistically significant reduction in the number of people who were admitted to asylums, for example, with alcohol-related issues. There was a massive reduction in the number of people who were experiencing medical. Can everyone just mute themselves if you're not already muted? Who experienced a massive reduction in medical-related issues caused by alcohol, and also alcohol criminality and violence from public drunkenness massively reduced as well. Organised crime was already a thing. It wasn't created in the Prohibition era. It didn't get worse. They certainly made money off illegal liquor, but they carried on well after Prohibition, and there was a lot of violence already before and after Prohibition from that particular sector as well. But this particular myth has crept into the consciousness, and it's sort of spread to other areas as well. And so it's not uncommon to hear pro-choice people claiming that the prohibition of abortion, legal prohibition, has no impact on the number of abortions. That is simply not true. The law is, and this is my key point, the law is what the Greeks would call, or in Latin, the pedagogue. The law is a teacher. And in actual fact, most people within a society will take the law as their guide for what is morally permissible or not. And if the law outlaws something, most people will either avoid doing that thing, or they will certainly not do it publicly. They'll try and do it in surreptitious ways to get away with it. But generally speaking, people will actually take the law as a guide. And so I think that's important to remember, that the law is a pedagogue, and it's just something I think is worthy of our consideration when we think about these legal questions and laws and how they work. So sometimes people will say things like, well, I don't think the law or the legal status of abortion has any bearing on the number of abortions in a society, so we shouldn't focus on that. I would strongly reject that. The evidence does not support that claim, and it's not how human nature works. In actual fact, the law does matter a lot. And at the very least, a healthy, humane society could not have a law on the books which said that it was legally permissible to kill another innocent human being, just like a humane society could not have said all those many decades ago, those generations back, well, we'll just abolish slavery in other ways, we'll discourage the slave trade, but we will leave the legal status of slavery alone because it doesn't matter. In actual fact, it does matter. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. Now, my third and final point to perhaps wrap this up before we get into some questions, and that is this. When we think about incrementalism versus abolitionism, I would like us to consider this possibility. What if this is actually a false dichotomy? What is a false dichotomy? Well, a false dichotomy is a type of logical fallacy where what you do is you set up a scenario and you say that there are one of two options and you must choose which one. You know, which one do you support? Which one do you think is right? So two options are put on the table and you're told to make your choice. You are confronted with a dichotomy. The problem is, in a false dichotomy, what happens is you are presented with only two choices, but in actual fact, there are other possibilities as well. And so I think rather than just a strict binary, And that's why it's a false dichotomy. Can I suggest to you that I think that there is a type of false dichotomy that can happen in the debate that happens between pro-lifers over the question of abolitionism versus incrementalism? Let me just unpack this a little bit more with a few questions. First of all, what if the greatest abolitionist, and I'm speaking here of William Wilberforce, actually used incrementalism to further his abolition? Because he did. For those who don't know, and he's often people who don't perhaps understand his history as well, if you want to read an excellent biography on the complete life of William Wilberforce, I would absolutely recommend the book Hero for Humanity. And if you do, you discover that in actual fact, even though William Wilberforce was absolutely committed to an end to the abolition of slavery, he was more than happy to support and use incremental means to get there. One of the first acts, an anti-slavery act, that he actually voted for did not ban slavery at all. What it did was it actually placed legal limits on the way in which slaves could be transported. So it limited the number of slaves that could be carried on a ship, for example. And he voted in favour of that as a step in the journey. The next major piece of legislation that he voted for outlawed slavery in Britain, but not in British territories. In fact, it would take another couple of decades for that to be realised. That was another incremental step along the way. So I think that's something to think about. If someone who's often held up by pro-life abolitionism as being sort of a great model, and I really do think he is, of abolitionism, if he's willing to use incrementalism as well, I think that should give us pause to consider whether or not there is a bit of a false dichotomy going on here. Abolitionism, what if abolitionism cannot achieve its aim without some form of incremental change? Because even a very committed legal abolitionist, at the very least, is going to have to work incrementally to change society in order to see that goal achieved. Barring some sort of massively cataclysmic calamity, some sort of apocalyptic level calamity where the whole of society and government and everything just collapses in totality, or some beautiful divine miracle where everyone was to experience some profound conversion to Christianity and all of a sudden laws were to start changing as a result, then even the most committed abolitionist, the way that they're going to have to achieve their aim, their legal abolition aim, is they're going to have to work in society to incrementally change hearts and minds and bring more and more people on board. What if incrementalism is no longer a viable option for those on the incremental side? I think this is something worth thinking about. I've been in the space now working and actively engaged at the coalface for, as I said, almost 21 years. And I've seen some changes in that time. And I know some of you who are tuned in tonight have probably got even more miles under your belt. You've got more experience than I have in the pro-life movement. And I laud you for that, by the way. But one thing that I think that we are really getting to now is in Western society, we are coming to a crux point of collapse. Basically, what we knew before, the old liberal order, has really shown itself to be ultimately ineffective. It's not sustainable. There is a small group, and I don't mean tiny, but there is a small group, generally speaking, of liberals, particularly secular liberals out there, who are still trying to claim that if we could just get back to some sort of old-timey liberalism, then everything would come right in society. That's the path we need to track. But it's almost certain that that is not going to happen, because the reason that I think we're in a lot of the mess that we're in the West is precisely because liberalism had a flawed anthropology, a flawed understanding of the human person and human nature. And it built a whole system of society and governance on some fundamental anthropological flaws. And the reason it was able to sustain itself was because it actually happened within a Christian society. And it was the remaining roots, the deep roots of the tree of Christianity, that were actually able to sustain and uphold society as liberalism began to, take hold and spread further and further. But as more and more of the tree of Christianity was attacked with the axe of liberalism, finally, once they got to the taproot, that was it. That's the situation we're in now. And so what that means is all of a sudden now we're in a situation where this liberal order, anything good that it had, was taken directly from the tree of Christianity. The tree of Christianity has now been severed, and you're no longer in a Christian society. The Christian memory of your society has been lost. There's been a type of de-Christianization has gone on. And now people don't know where to go to get that good fruit they desperately want back. People don't want to live in a violent, inhumane, barbaric society, but they're not sure how to get back there. And so why I'm saying this as a backgrounder is that what if incrementalism is actually no longer a viable option, because currently we're in a state of sort of societal collapse in the West, and the people who are the power brokers, who actually hold the power within government, are committed to liberal ideologies, have such, in some cases, even more flawed anthropologies, that the idea of actually even reversing abortion laws or euthanasia laws is just not even something on their radar. In their mind, it's just about further liberalisation. Now, I'm not making a definitive statement there, but I think that that is something worthy of our consideration, because I know that we've had at least one very effective, well-funded, well-researched and well-executed pro-life campaign around euthanasia in this country recently. And it really was quite easily one of the best, or probably the best, I think, pro-life campaigns we've ever had, a political and very strategic and well-researched campaign, right down to the colours that should be used in the marketing material. And that particular campaign was not able to achieve the desired outcome of stopping euthanasia, despite an amazingly valiant and heroic and truly creative and just wonderful effort on the part of those who were involved, people I know personally and I love deeply, who just gave heart and soul. But what happened was, we discovered in that situation that even the best and most well-funded of political strategies is coming up against something else now. There is a collapse within society that actually has an effect on the various legal strategies that we might try and implement, and I think that's worthy of consideration. I'm not saying we shouldn't try for incremental change. I'm not saying let's all be hopeless. We should be people of hope, and we should keep working with hope, but I think we should also have our eye on the ball as well, certainly the current situation as it sits. I think about something like euthanasia, and the reality is we might be able to be effective at stopping and halting bills that might want to further liberalise, but I'm not convinced that we will necessarily be effective at dialing back the clock on that law. And one of the reasons is not just because of the liberal ideology and the fact that it is predominantly liberal, wealthy liberal people who are really in the position of power and control over our laws, and they are the biggest users of euthanasia, but also the fact that there are now market forces at play, and euthanasia is actually a cost-saving tool. It's already being openly talked about in Western nations as such. And so you can see that there are these other very powerful and pernicious forces at work, social, economic, etc., that will have a bearing and will hamper our ability and our pro-life efforts. So I just think that's something that we should be aware of. What if abolitionism has a mixed record? Because I know that, and I know some really beautiful, committed abolitionist people, and they will tell you that they believe that it actually is the most effective way forward. But if we look at something like slavery, I think it is worth considering that despite his amazing and heroic and very important efforts to outlaw the transatlantic slave trade and outlaw slavery within England, we have far more slavery now today in the world than what we did previously, even accounting for population growth. It's more of a problem. And again, I think this speaks to the previous point that I was making, that we need to see beyond just legal questions and consider the cultural context, and not just the loss of the Christian culture at the heart of, in fact, I would argue that without Christianity, you don't even have authentic culture, not just the loss of Christian culture and the sense of respect for human dignity and humane and moral and virtuous laws that we've lost sight of, but also we've enshrined now at the very heart of our law the practice of widespread and very liberal abortion, and we have enshrined that as a right, and we are even celebrating that violence. And that absolutely has a bearing. You cannot have negative impacts upon a society. You can't do things like that and get away with it, basically. It's going to have an impact, and it's going to have a certain searing, a burning of the moral conscience that isn't good in wider society. And we need to be aware of these forces that are at play in that regard. Which brings me to, I guess, one of my key points I want to make. What if it's actually, when it comes to incrementalism versus abolitionism, what if it's actually both and, not either or? What if we need both? And we're sort of treating it like a debate and it's a dichotomy between one or the other, but in actual fact, what if it's supposed to be both and? what if we need both incrementalism, and I would argue, as I've said already previously, I think even the most committed legal abolitionist is going to have to try and bring about incremental change at the societal level to see their goal achieved. But also incrementalists, I think we need abolitionists. Because one thing absolutely that I think is a good fruit of a strong, vibrant, and very public and vocal abolitionism in your society is it shifts the Overton window. For those who don't know what the Overton window is, the Overton window is basically just a way of describing and measuring what is considered acceptable in the public discourse in a society. What topics, what issues are acceptable and which ones are off limits. And what we have experienced previously is an Overton window that has shifted more towards the progressive, secular, ideological left side of the spectrum. I don't just mean to the left, but towards the more extreme fringes. And as a result, certain topics previously have just not, you can't even have certain types of conversations in polite society. Well, that has changed radically in the last 5 to 10 years. And what's happened now is the Overton window has shifted back. And that means that, and there is now not just open conversations happening in public about issues like abortion, but they are happening in some of the most surprising places. You have people like Joe Rogan, who many months ago came out and expressed his concern. You've had people who previously have identified themselves as being pro-choice liberals or pro-choice Democrats in America who are now openly talking about their concerns, or some who have even moved away from a pro-abortion position. I think that's a direct result of the shifting of the Overton window, and I think abolitionism actually helps to promote that, because it forcefully brings into the public consciousness and discussion a more serious and firm conversation about abortion. It's not just sort of playing around at the edges. It's really, really going for the heart of the issue, and I think that's a good thing. What if we're actually called to be incremental abolitionists? And this is my belief. This is the strategy, the posture, if you like, that I have adopted in my work, and I believe that we should be working towards. And that is that we should be incremental abolitionists, that we work in various different incremental ways, sometimes within the law, sometimes in society, sometimes in culture, sometimes in education, but we are working to try and achieve the abolition of abortion. What if also we see abolition as not just being a society-wide abolition, but also an individual abolition? I know in my life, God has graced me with at least one opportunity that I know of where someone chose not to have an abortion as a result of the humble contribution that I have made to the pro-life cause in this country. And you know what that's a moment of in my mind? That's a beautiful gift, and it's something I'm so grateful for to have been party to. But that there is actually a moment of individual abortion abolition. Someone chose to abolish abortion in their own life, not to proceed with it. So what if we started thinking about abolitionism in that context as well? What if my conversation, what if my efforts could actually even just abolish one abortion at a time? That's also a really, really good thing. Some final thoughts before we go to questions, just to wrap us all up. I think, and this is really important for me, I think our movement really needs to focus on unity, not uniformity, if it is going to be successful. Unity is that we are all together moving forward in that same direction in our opposition to evils like abortion, or abortion and euthanasia, or maybe you're just in the euthanasia fight, but we are unified. Uniformity is where we expect everybody to be doing and acting exactly the same way. But can I suggest to you that in actual fact, it is unity, not uniformity. And what that means is this is where we can have a beautiful and legitimate diversity within our movement, a legitimate diversity of approaches where some people firmly commit themselves into the abolitionist camp and that's where they are going and they're not moving. Others are firmly committed to incrementalism. Others might adopt a halfway house between the two. It's all good. And it's actually quite a good and important thing for our movement if we have that, I think. That unity over uniformity, and where we have that kind of diversity, also means not just are we sort of spreading our strategic arms into different areas at the same time and having a crack at different things that might produce positive results, but I think it also means that we can help to keep each other accountable, that we don't necessarily have all our eggs in one basket. And so what that means is that the different approaches can help to level out perhaps the excesses or the weaknesses in the other. Our strengths and weaknesses can work together. One thing I really implore you and I really, really implore you on this point, is no matter which camp you are in or you identify with, please, please, please work hard to reject and to refuse to participate in the toxicity of particularly what we see in the US abolition versus incrementalism divide. I don't think it's as toxic in other countries, but certainly in America, it can get really toxic. And it breaks my heart to see that happening. And I think all of us, that's something that we desperately want to avoid. We need to be serious about unity. And I think that means we have to work hard to actually avoid that toxicity that I've seen in some places in the States. Like, for example, where you will have certain abolitionist groups who will turn up and they will protest against the pro-life March for Life in America. We don't want that stuff happening in New Zealand. It is not a good thing. It is absolutely toxic. And we want to avoid that. We don't need to be at war with each other. We might disagree on strategy, depending on where you sit on this particular question. But surely what's more important is what unites us. And what unites us is that opposition to the killing of innocent human beings. And obviously, if it's in the euthanasia space, the assisting of the suicides of people at the end of their lives as well. One last thing, you can catch more flies with a spoonful of honey than you do with a jar of vinegar. Thank you, Aristotle, for that very wise and I think important saying. So I think no matter where we sit on this particular spectrum, where we find ourselves, what our thoughts are about abolitionism versus incrementalism, there's no doubt that if we want to be effective at winning people to the pro-life cause, we need to actually be people who are bringing a spoonful of honey. Now, a spoonful of honey doesn't mean that you hide the truth. No, because that wouldn't be loving. We tell the truth, but we present that truth with charity, with clarity, with courage, and also with intelligence. Just throwing around jars of vinegar in our society is not actually going to be effective at winning hearts and minds for our cause. Just like the third way, which is we just don't talk about the difficult issues like abortion, is not effective either. We need to be honest, but I think a spoonful of honey, as Aristotle would say to us, absolutely will allow us to catch more flies than a jar filled with vinegar. That's all I want to say. So Lydia, I'm going to hand back to you now and open the floor for questions that people might want to ask or points of dialogue that they might want to engage with based on what I've just said. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Brendan. That was really, really great and really helpful, and definitely has given me some things to think about as well. So love it and totally agree. Does anyone have any questions? Let's keep it to questions first, and then we can have more discussion afterwards if we've got time.
I don't have a question, but is it possible just to have a few minutes to say a few things?
Can we just maybe leave that until and answer some questions first, and then we can have some discussion after that?
Yep.
I have a question.
Go for gold.
Great. Thank you, Brendan, for your presentation. That was interesting to listen to. So, is Voice for Life a openly Christian organization?
We're not, sorry, I wasn't sure if Brendan wasn't going to answer or not. We're not a denominational or a religious organization. So we're a non-religious organization. Many people who are involved in Voice for Life are Christian or religious, but Voice for Life specifically isn't.
But Voice for Life is specifically an incrementalist organization?
I think we'd probably classify ourselves as incremental abolitionists. Brendan, do you want to answer this further?
Yeah, we don't, as far as I'm aware, we don't have any official constitutional position. Voice for Life doesn't have any official constitutional position on that particular specific question. I think the understanding would be, and please, I don't want to speak out of school here on behalf of the exec, who can probably clarify this, or Lydia as president, but I think that my general understanding is that the exec would see that itself as helping to safeguard like a broad church pro-life movement where there are different people with different approaches who are part of that, who are unified in that work together. But they don't have a specific institutional policy on that question, as far as I understand it.
Because during your presentation, you said, I think didn't you say that as a organization, Voice of Life would accept incremental bills or incremental movements in the law?
No, I didn't say that specifically, but I think Voice for Life, based on its history, would absolutely support incremental change. It has actually tried for that and worked for that end in the past, and some very clear examples of that.
Okay. And so there's not like an underlying foundational philosophy of saying, like, abortion is murder. Like, are we all agreed? Is Voice for Life, would everyone in Voice for Life say we are agreed that abortion is murder?
I don't think you'd find too many. They might disagree about that terminology, but I don't think anyone would disagree with the statement that abortion is wrong because it is the deliberate killing of an innocent human being, and that is immoral.
Right. Okay, so just picking up on what you said in your presentation about incrementalism. So would we say that, broadly speaking, Voice for Life would accept a bill that said, a 20-week cutoff, for example? No babies may be murdered after 20 weeks, but the ones before 20 weeks will accept that.
I can't speak for Voice for Life, but I can speak for myself as an incremental abolitionist, and I'll do that. And absolutely, I would support such a bill as an incremental step forward because it would limit the killing and it would save lives. It would actually reduce the number of victims, just like if there was some way, it wouldn't be possible, but if there was some way during the Holocaust to limit the number of people being sent to the death camps, I'd absolutely get involved in supporting that limitation. It's not the end step, though. That's the really key point. An incrementalist does not say, well, job done now. We can just ignore everyone under 20 weeks. An incrementalist would say, what do we do now after that to keep forward momentum going?
So, so with saying, okay, after 20 weeks, we will say you're not allowed to murder those children. But before 20 weeks, we will not prosecute you if you murder those children. Is that
would be the secular state doing that, not Voice for Life and not any incrementalist. So this is a really key point to understand about morality. Intentionality and your proximity to a particular moral action is really key in all of this. And so it's not an individual pro-life incrementalist or incrementalist organization who is saying, yeah, we're okay if you kill children under 20 weeks, but not after 20. The pro-life organization is saying we support the limiting of the evil, we support restrictions, and we're going to fight for that, and we're going to bring the number of victims down, reduce the gravity of the total amount of that evil taking place in our society, but we don't support this half measure either. We're still working to try and reduce it even further. It is the state, the secular state, which would actually be making that decision, and they are the ones who bear the moral culpability for that.
I'd argue that since we vote, we also share in that moral culpability as well. But how consistent would you be? Like if the state came out with a law saying we will allow the abortion of girl babies because we've got to, our population is skewed too much towards feminine babies, but we won't allow the abortion of male babies. Would you? Because that would reduce abortions as well. Would you also? Would Voice for Life support a bill like that? I mean, is reduction in baby death
Okay, so I can't speak for Voice for Life, but I can speak from the incrementalist principles. You wouldn't support a bill like that because that would be introducing a brand new evil and adding more evil to an already evil situation. You're not describing a strict reduction here. You're talking about adding in a whole new type of category of evil. Not like I said earlier, not every incremental strategy would be considered acceptable to an incrementalist. And I think that's important. Each strategy or each idea has to be judged on its merits. And obviously the most important one is the question of morality.
I'm just trying because I'm not sure if you see the parallel there. Maybe like with the race issue, like if we said, Maori babies can legitimately be aborted, but not other races, because that would also reduce. It would be a huge reduction in the number of overall abortions, which seems to be what's the foundation? Because as a Christian, I'm like, abortion is murder. The Bible tells me, love my neighbor as myself. My preborn neighbors are they're my neighbors. I should love them. If I've got the choice to vote or support a bill, why would I say from this stage, it's illegitimate to murder them, and therefore it is legitimate. We're not going to prosecute. I don't support the prosecution of people who murder children who are slightly younger. Like, given the Bible's so clear with the line of "do not murder, love your neighbor as yourself," how can we, okay? So going back to the race one.
I'll answer that question. And as I said, not every incremental proposal is the same, and it's not simply a matter of saying, well, a total reduction is enough. No, because you'd be introducing not just a reduction, but you'd be introducing the evil of racism and race-based killing, and we couldn't support that either. So it's not simply a matter of reduction. And again, I go back to that key point I made before. If a pro-lifer supports an incremental strategy or like a law that would actually reduce the total number of abortions, say by bringing down the age limit, that pro-lifer is not saying, I support the killing of under 20-week-olds. What they are saying is, I abhor abortion and I want to bring about an end. And in the meantime, while I cannot see the full end achieved with abolition, I will still support measures that will reduce the total amount of killing. And so in that situation, it's not the pro-lifer, it is the state who is actually the one who is in control of that law and who is executing the killing. The pro-lifer is trying to insert themselves with whatever power they can, in this case is being what it is, a democratic vote, to try and do something to throw themselves into the wheels of death and try and cog up the machinery, even if only a little bit, to try and actually reduce the total amount of killing. But by doing that, they're not saying, well, I'm okay with this other killing. No, not at all. And that wouldn't be incrementalism, as I said earlier. And I think this is key. I think it's really key to understand, because I know often abolitionists will try and argue that incrementalists, by acting the way they do, they are saying they're morally okay with some level of killing. That's not incrementalism. That's not the incrementalist position.
So yeah,
Okay, I
not
want to
morally.
open it up.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Daniel.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to open it up for some other questions, because we've got some other people that are really keen to ask some questions too. Can we go to Ethan? Ethan, did you have a question?
Hi, yes. Are you able to hear me at the moment?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can, Ethan.
Hey, Brendan, thank you for your presentation. I'm a teacher at a Christian school. I teach an ethics course and we do a term on abortion. And I wanted to just ask, this is mainly a clarifying question, but you spoke about keeping your eye on the goal and being an incremental abolitionist.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about what the goal is in your mind. So a few questions. I'll put my question here in the chat as well. But part of what I want to ask is, do we have the same end goal? Particularly, would it be just to prosecute women for murder, for getting an abortion? Do you think that's something that would be just? Second, would you support the stigmatization and shaming of abortion as a good and right cultural attitude? And third, is your end goal for the unborn to have all the same rights and protections as other citizens?
Okay, let me work my way backwards from the third question first. No, it's not my end goal. This is me speaking. It's not my end goal to have an unborn child with all the exact same rights, because that's not actually possible, because there are certain rights that an unborn child can't exercise. So it can't exercise right to freedom of speech, can't speak yet. Can't exercise right to freedom of association or movement because it can't leave its mother's womb. So there are clear differences that couldn't be realised. However, there are absolutely the one fundamental parallel and similarity that must absolutely be honoured for all human beings, is that their fundamental and most important right of all, their right to life, must be respected, just the same as a born person. Their right to life is already respected.
Just
so
to
yes,
clarify that last point there, so would you say, regarding the right to life, then the same legal protections for their right to life?
Yes, I would argue that that is absolutely the goal. The same legal recognition. Any innocent living human person should be given the same legal recognition as any other innocent living human person. Second question that you asked was, what was that? About shame?
Yes.
Would you support the stigmatizing and shame of abortion?
Yeah, I really do. I do think that abortion, as like all moral evils, that there should be a cultural recognition of shame. And what we need to and there should be an ownership that it is a shameful thing to do evil things. That's just a basic tenet, I think, of good, sound morality. However, obviously, there'd also need to be the fact that we would need to be discerning and careful about women who genuinely already feel the grief, shame, and guilt of an abortion they might have been involved with, or a male, a father who's been involved, or another family member. And so I think we'd need to make room and discern carefully how we would also speak to that particular group of people and ensure that they are not driven into any sort of unnecessary despair, but at the same time, we don't compromise on the fact that it is absolutely not a good thing. And a person who does things like deliberately ending life, we should feel it's actually natural and good to feel shame when we do evil.
On that question about shame, just in your experience, have you noticed a change in like feminist attitudes towards abortion in terms of a more flagrant and cocky celebration of abortion in the culture? Like the catchphrase used to be safe, legal, rare. Now it's shout your abortion.
Yes,
is that something you've seen?
Absolutely. And that is a factor from some sectors. And that is definitely something, one of the noticeable trends I've seen change in my time, that it has gone from literally abortion might be a necessary evil to you should actually have it as a right and you should celebrate that thing. And that obviously that is speaking to a very serious searing and burning of the moral conscience. Now, if I can get to your third question that you asked, what was my end? Oh no, the prosecution, I think was the third question. The legal prosecution of people. I think it would depend on the scenario, and it would depend on the situation. But yes, I can absolutely see that there could be legitimate situations where someone who's actually participated in the act or committed an abortion would be held legally accountable for doing that. There are other scenarios where I imagine that I think we would look carefully, and rightly so, like we do in other areas of the law. We would recognize that perhaps there is a diminished moral culpability, that someone might have been pressured to do something that if the pressure hadn't been there, they wouldn't have otherwise done. And so factors like that would have to be taken into account. But absolutely, I can imagine scenarios where someone who is deliberately, willfully, and is quite openly and honestly saying that they've done this thing, that I can imagine a situation where a prosecution would be a just and proper response.
Thank you very much for answering my questions. One follow-up, then I'll stop hogging the mic. Regarding the issue of shame, do you think some of the pro-life approaches have taken a kid gloves approach towards women and abortion, and therefore not intentionally but destigmatized the shamefulness of the sin of abortion?
I would say, okay, you could possibly point to individual cases here or there, like you could anywhere, where people who are human beings, are imperfect, maybe didn't quite get the language in the way they intended, and they might have given an impression that wasn't necessarily as accurate as they would have liked to. I can imagine those scenarios, but I think generally I would say no, that the pro-life movement has tried to actually, I think, be loving and humane to the woman who the research indicates to us in the vast majority of circumstances are often pressured into having an abortion. And so they've tried to be loving and humane. I would argue that what's a bigger driving factor in the loss of shame is the expansion and the practice of abortion itself. What happens is the more you commit a particular evil, the greater the searing of the human conscience is. And I think that's a bigger factor in this. Yep, could there be individual examples where maybe things weren't phrased as perfect as they could, and maybe that's had the unintended effect or an effect that's not so good on maybe reducing shame? Sure. But I think generally speaking, the pro-life movement, I would say, has been fair and has tried its best, despite those individual examples, to actually present a sound, moral, loving, and uncompromising face.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thanks.
Yeah. Would I be able to speak into this, please, Lydia?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to just a couple of basics. First of all, I'm Gina from the National Executive Team. On behalf of the National Exec and the Voice for Life, I would just like to reiterate that all of the things that Brendan has shared, we totally affirm. We hold, there's nothing that you've heard Brendan share this evening that we do not agree with, nothing. And I'd like to get back to just a couple of basics. Just like to make it clear to everybody that Voice for Life never agreed, never sat still when the law that was made in 1977 set the 20-week law in, where babies could be aborted up to 20 weeks. We didn't do nothing. There was branches all over the country from both camps still advocating and working to see that changed. But then when the law was actually debated, we saw it passed. Everyone just needs to know that Voice for Life worked very hard. There was a lot of movement, a lot of work across this nation. I think from memory, up to maybe 80% of the members of Parliament actually received visitations from Voice for Life branch leaders and other branch members. Even I went to some of the members of Parliament's offices. We all took a preborn baby model of 20 weeks we named her Eve. They were all actually presented with a 20-week baby model. That's up to 80% of the members of Parliament. So we just need to be clear about the fact that Voice for Life takes a very wise stance on how we operate. We also, I just want to point out that unity, the things that Brendan mentioned about that, not to have uniformity, but unity, we strive to maintain the unity across the branches all over the country. So branches are able to work in both camps if that's what they want to do. If they want to hold up graphic images on the sides of highways for people to see that, that's fine. If that's what that branch wants to do. So there's unity in that. We don't go around condemning anybody because we see them doing things like that. So, and just lastly, I just would like to say that our vision is to not only lobby, government to see laws changed for better. Our vision is to see the hearts and minds of people change, to change culture. And so there's a lot of Voice for Life initiatives, that have taken place, are currently being planned, and will in the future take place to do exactly that, to see the hearts and minds of people to be informed and educated, and they change their mind, not the law. They change their mind when they're fully informed about the horrors of abortion and what it does. So I'll leave it there because I'm sure there's other people who would like to ask some questions, but I just want to reiterate on behalf of the executive that we affirm everything that you've heard Brendan say this evening.
Thanks, Gina. Mike's got a question.
Brendan, thank you very much for an extremely well-prepared and interesting discussion, which some of the stuff I'd never heard before, so that's much appreciated. Recently, Auckland University did some research with regard to euthanasia and discovered that actually the medical profession, some of them are very distressed about literally assisted suicide. And so I'm going to use that research to actually, put the point of view in the public arena. But what I'd like to ask you, and I don't know if this got anything to do with incrementalism, I cannot understand genuinely, first, do no harm, the medical profession's foundational ethic. How is it that doctors can actually take action against an unborn baby in the most brutal manner? Can you understand? I can't understand this.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing there is, again, we shouldn't be surprised by this. If a society loses its essential moral core and its essential moral heart, then you would expect to see a certain corruption of institutions, including the practice of medicine, unfortunately, unfold. Now, there are a lot of good doctors out there, and there is also a bit of an unspoken thing that in my experience, I've got friends in the medical field, and my conversations with them, nurses and doctors, that even their fellow travellers within the medical profession who are not pro-life, they wouldn't call themselves that. There is a sort of almost an unspoken understanding that they're not really interested in abortion. Even in our current cultural context, the government is red flagging the fact that they are struggling to get medical professionals to sign up. They've really struggled to try and get midwives trained to perform abortions. They just haven't been lining up for it. And the general understanding, I believe this is still the case, is that most doctors in particular have the sense that abortion is kind of that thing you do if you don't really achieve particularly well at med school. It's an icky business they don't really want to have a lot to do with. So, but laying that aside, the reality is that unfortunately, people will do what? They'll base their actions based on the moral, either philosophy or ideology that they have been formed by. And so we shouldn't be surprised to discover that there are people in the practice of medicine who have been badly formed or misformed by bad ideology and who are acting on that. Secondly, we know this is a long-standing principle of moral philosophy, that if a person even does an evil act once, and often the more grave the evil, the easier it becomes to actually go back and do it a second or third time. And the more that happens, there's a certain dulling of the conscience that can happen. But the indication is that they, as I said, they are struggling. It's not like doctors are lining up to perform or participate. And I think that's important to note. And that is a positive sign.
Thank you.
And what we also saw in that euthanasia research that you were referring to, Mike, is that doctors who perform a lot of euthanasias become dulled to it, and they say it's like the greatest reward, and it's like such a rewarding work and whatever else. But then if you actually look at the stats of the numbers of doctors who are actually partaking in euthanasia in New Zealand, that keeps on dropping. So there's a very small number of people that are actually willing to participate. Just an interesting stat.
Yeah.
Can I say
any other questions? Yes.
Sorry,
you go,
Lydia, I'll address that point. Two things. One is there's a certain danger or problem in that, because what that means is you're really left with a small cadre of the most conscience-seared individuals. And I think that's why we see some of these strange, I would call them almost sociopathic or psychopathic things, like that. Some of you have probably seen that interview with the euthanasia doctor from overseas who is quite gleeful about euthanasia. But also we've known for some time in the field of veterinary medicine, it's been well studied that vets who have to euthanize animals, we're not even talking about human beings here, there is a very high rate of PTSD and mental health issues. So you can only imagine what it's doing to someone. That's a pet, that's an animal, which almost certainly in theory would be a lot easier to participate in than the deliberate ending of a human life. So you can only imagine what it's actually doing, and why a lot of doctors are just, even if they dip their toes in, they sort of pull out of it because of that factor, the PTSD.
Thank you.
No, exactly. Right. Any other questions?
Can I just say something to that question? That was a really good question from the other guy. Can I just read out a Bible verse? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
This is Romans 1, verse 20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. The reason why these people can kill other people and do harm to other people, brother, is because they do not know God. And because they do not know God, they have become futile in their thinking, and they think it's okay. And I want to tell you this. They are making the same fault that I believe the pro-life movement may be making here in New Zealand, because they honor the older person, which is the mother, let's say in this situation. They say her body, her choice. And then when you look at the babies in the womb, 20 weeks older, 20 weeks younger, at heartbeat bills, whatever it is, it's making that same distinction. It's saying there's some more value placed on somebody who is older and less value on someone who is younger. And I would just say that's futile thinking.
In response to that, I'd say that you couldn't say that for certain. You'd have to know someone's intention, you'd have to know their heart as to why they supported, say, for example, a 20-week ban in a very liberal abortion country. if their thinking was, well, it's because I support the mother, then sure, you could make that case. But I would actually argue that a lot of pro-lifers wouldn't be thinking that way. They wouldn't be prioritizing. They'd be saying, I'm supporting this because it will reduce the evil and the total number of innocent lives lost. So I think that's something I'd be very careful about. Your first point, spot on. I think the reality is that a culture that loses sight of the fundamental lawgiver is not going to understand what a sound moral law actually
Yeah,
looks like.
and I agree with you, Brendan. And that's why I think the answer to this madness is the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. The answer is to preach. The answer is to proclaim his truth. And I think you to be presented beautifully today, like way more beautiful than I could ever present. I think everyone can see that. You presented really well. But one thing that you didn't do is you didn't show God's standards. And if you looked into God's word and you saw his standards, I think the gospel of Wilberforce would just whittle away. The gospel of Brendan Malone's, amazing slides would whittle away. There is a God that is watching. And what I've seen in the history of this nation is that we have, and I mean this respectfully, we have tried to be very worldly wise to an issue that's very spiritual. And there's a God that's watching. And that God, he parts the seas. That God raises people from the dead. And he saves us from eternal hellfire. And he's watching us. And I would want to be on the side that pleads with that God, that pleads with our fellow man by preaching the gospel and doing what the Lord has told me to do. Go make disciples. Teach the nations. And so I would just say, brother, I mean this very respectfully, and I'm so, I was enamored by tonight. I thought it was great. But I do think one thing that's lacking is the word of God. And we were trying to read it from this very small little Gideon Bible, the street preaching Bibles that you give to people. And so that's why I stumbled over that. But that's a beautiful verse for this moment. We live in a nation, and I hope you weep for it, a nation that needs to.
Absolutely. And I would say, let's not forget the words of God himself when he came to earth in the person of Christ Jesus and told us, be gentle as doves, but cunning as serpents. And he told us we need to have a certain guile about us as we navigate these issues. It's always been a traditional tenet of Christianity. The gospel of William Wilberforce was the gospel of Jesus Christ. You might not be aware of this, but he wrote what the great Edmund Burke said on his deathbed he thought was one of the best defenses of Christianity ever written by Wilberforce. So I think it's important to remember that the way the gospel animates us is, yes, we must preach, but we must also live and act. And the gospel must be. There's an old saying wrongly attributed to St. Francis. He didn't say it, but the saying is, preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. And so I think there's a way in which we can preach the gospel in our actions and the way in which we engage with the law.
Can you preach the gospel without words?
Absolutely, you can.
Tell me how.
You live as Christ lived in total self-giving love and abandonment to the
truth. What is the gospel, Brendan?
Love for neighbor.
What is the gospel?
Well, I think we're starting to get off track a little bit here,
Josh.
Josh.
I'm just saying, if you defined what the gospel was, you would know that you can't actually do it. You can only say it.
I think you're missing the point of the webinar tonight. I think a lot of us are Christians and will share the gospel, and I'm sure this is true for Brendan too, but I know it's true for myself. We'll share the gospel in our daily lives, not just living the gospel out, but also sharing the gospel with friends and colleagues and people that we come into contact with regularly. And but that's not the point of tonight's specific webinar, which was incrementalist versus abolitionist. And so I just do want to open up to other questions. If anyone has any questions about the webinar, I know Kathy had some questions at the beginning and we haven't gone back to her. So Kathy, did you have anything that you wanted to say? If you're still on. You might need to unmute yourself if you are still on. I can't see you. Oh, yeah, there you are.
Probably most of what I wanted to say has actually been covered, but I did just want to add that Voice for Life, which was originally start out, although it was started by Christian people, it wasn't presented as a Christian organisation, and that was so that people who were atheists, Muslims, other religions could join. And I think although we are largely a Christian faith, we have to be very welcoming to those people. A Muslim client of mine once told me that if a Muslim woman has an abortion, the child will stand beside God at her last judgment and pronounce judgment against her, which seems pretty harsh, not very forgiving.
Kathy, on that point, there's an interesting document from the early church, actually, an extra scriptural writing. So it's not a scriptural piece, but it was widely beloved and even used in some liturgical contexts, called the Apocalypse of Peter. It's almost Dante-esque, like Dante's Inferno, and it actually describes something similar with the souls of aborted babies and their mothers.
Yeah, pretty harsh. You did mention, I think, that abolitionists wanted to say that it was still okay to not do an abortion if the mother's life was at risk.
Yeah, there are some abolitionists who would support that position. Generally, what I've seen, most abolitionists would oppose even that.
Yeah, I mean, this has been my line of work, working with pregnant mums. If you don't deliver a baby early, if the mum is gravely ill, the baby will die with the mother.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and if a sick mother usually equates to a sick baby, there are not many situations, where this kind of thing would happen, especially with, modern treatments. But the aim is always to get the baby mature enough to deliver so you can save the baby and the mother.
Exactly. Yeah.
Classic example of that is actually one like a family that I know. The mum was pregnant and she gave birth to her baby on Saturday by emergency C-section. She'd been in hospital on bed rest for a couple of weeks, and the baby was 23 weeks. They didn't think the baby would live. The mum was not in a great place either, but the mum's doing much better, and the baby is still alive, like nearly a week later, which is really a miracle, and he seems to be doing well. So, yeah.
The youngest baby in the world to survive was under 22 weeks, a little boy in Canada.
Yeah.
So, you have to take a chance when those situations arrive and hope that you can save both. I remember a situation where we had a woman who only had 30% cardiac output, and she died in the ward despite all best efforts. And we did a crash cesarean and saved the baby, because there was no chance of saving her. Did a crash Caesar in the ward because the baby had to be out in 5 minutes. Those kind of judgments to make are horrendously challenging.
I agree, and that's the bleeding edge, really, of where ethics the rubber hits the road. And there are those scenarios, and that's why I think we need to be discerning about those. There's a 2,000-year history of Christian moral philosophy that can be brought to bear to help us discern. So what tends to happen is sometimes people on the other side will go to the hard cases first and try and make a general rule. We would say you start with the principles, and then you move out to the hard cases and say, how would those principles apply? And that's what you're saying then, really.
And just to reaffirm that we need to approach the topic with gentleness and love, because shouting at people will not convert their hearts and minds.
Yep,
and I have seen that happen on the edges of the pro-life marches, people getting very heated and having terrible discussions where the aim is peace and gentleness. Yep. So that's probably covers most of what I wanted to say, but that's okay. Thank you.
On that last point there, Kathy, good point. One way to do that, folks, is if you're in a situation where someone is getting a bit heated and the topic is abortion, you can simply just, I think, frame your conversation via questions. So asking questions invites them into dialogue and often can be a way just to bring the heat down a little bit.
Yeah.
Well said, Kathy.
Yep.
Totally.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I think so often as a pro-life movement, we're kind of scared to have conversations with people, or we kind of feel like people are always going to disagree with us. But I fly a lot for work, like most weeks at the moment. And You know, you're sitting next to someone for like an hour, hour and a half, sometimes longer. And it's so interesting having conversations. People are always like, oh, what do you do? And I don't bother talking about my day job. I just talk about Voice for Life. I'm like, oh, I'm the national president of Voice for Life. And have you, you know, and then end up just, you know, raising questions and be like, hey, what's your thoughts about abortion and stuff like that? And, you know, like the majority of people that I've sat next to are super, like, not super, are actually pretty pro-life, which is encouraging, because I think sometimes we can be like, oh, people aren't like completely opposed to abortion, so therefore they're completely supporting abortion. It's like, no, actually, they just haven't necessarily had enough informed morals, or they haven't necessarily, you know, got the tools and stuff like that we've necessarily had the training in over time to understand where we're coming from and stuff like that. But most of the time, they are pretty opposed to abortion. And it's interesting, because then I was once sitting next to a pastor, and I won't say which church he was from, but anyway, a pastor, and then I was talking about abortion, and it was really interesting, because he was like, oh no, I don't talk about politics. And I was like, this isn't politics, man. This is abortion. This is the killing of an innocent human life. Like in the Bible, we're called to protect, you know, the mother and the widow and the fatherless and all of that kind of stuff. I was like, you know, doesn't that, but it was, he just didn't see my point. But I'm like, you know, so many non-Christians that I speak to are so much more willing to speak about abortion than what we often give them credit to. So I just want to use this opportunity just to encourage you guys to also just have conversations. I think, you know, so often we don't need to actually fully convert somebody in that first conversation to be, you know, like fully pro-life. But if we can help them understand that there's support out there for women, and that women who are facing an unplanned pregnancy can have the support to actually continue with their pregnancy. You know, even if that person isn't an abolitionist or like, you know, fully opposed to abortion, you know, whatever like way we want to word it, they're still going to be more pro-life than what they were potentially before that, you know, like in order to be able to actually support their friends or direct their friends or, you know, their friends' children to support if they, you know, faced that. So, yeah, hopefully that's a bit of an encouragement. Look, I see that Mike and Daniel both have some more questions. I'm sorry, I just wanted to raise that. It is 9 o'clock. I don't want to have ongoing debate a lot longer. This wasn't meant to be a debate. This was meant to be just an open discussion. If you've got a question, Daniel, we can answer that. If you wanted to debate it further, potentially sometime we can set up a Zoom for a debate, you know, abolitionists, but this wasn't the purpose of tonight's Zoom. But if you've got a question, go for gold.
Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, I was just wanting to follow up with Brendan. So the last question I asked you was, if we introduced like a racial distinction with the age of abortion, or with legitimizing abortion, you'd said that would be introducing a new kind of immorality, so we shouldn't support that. And my follow-up question was, well, there's already an existing ageism immorality that is built into the law, where we say, if we say under 20 weeks, we're distinguishing between babies at different ages based on, you know, a line of 20 weeks. So how could we support that law if we're not going to support also the racial distinction law? Like how do you consistently see that as a Christian?
Well, because one example, you're asking me to support and give my support to the killing of human persons based on their race. And it's an easy, hard pass. It's an absolute no. The other one, what I'm being asked to do is to actually give my support to the total reduction of the total number of abortions that would happen past a certain gestation. That does not mean that I am supportive of the abortions that are still going on. But if I could do something, as the scriptures tell us, to save someone pull them back from the edge of death, then I'm going to do that thing. And so I'm not giving my support. I'm not saying, well, it's okay as long as you're under 20 weeks. What I'm saying is this is an incremental movement forward. It is a movement away from a more extreme version of that evil. That evil still exists, but the scope of it has now been limited. That's what I'm supporting, a reduction in the total scope. And so that's the difference between the two. The other one, though, I would be expected to support race-based killing as a way to reduce the number, and that's different. because now you're asking me to support a methodology that I could not support. And so it seems to me there is a very clear distinction there.
In both cases, you're cementing into law the legitimacy of killing either a person of one kind of race or a person under a certain age, though. That's the parallel I'm asking you about.
Yeah, and I'm telling you that I'm not cementing anything into law. What I'm doing is I am throwing my support behind an intention. And intentionality really matters here. My intention is not to cement the killing of people 20 weeks into law. My intention is to reduce the total number of killing of unborn children that's going on. That's a good intention. If I wanted to cement the killing of under 20-week-olds, that's a bad intention. That's not what I support. And that's not why I'm acting in this way. In order to support the race-based one, though, I would absolutely have to be giving my support to race-based killing. And that's a very simple, easy no. So that's the distinction. Intentionality matters. In Christian moral tradition, intentionality matters.
And if I said, I don't want any white babies to die, so this is my intention, whereas I won't worry about the dark-skinned babies.
Yeah, and I would still be supporting racial killing by saying that. That's a problematic intention, morally problematic intention. The other one is not, to say my intention is to reduce the total amount of killing versus I'm actually okay with you killing certain races. They're different intentions, very different intentions.
Maybe you and I can pick that up on a discussion later on.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming along tonight. I guess, just to kind of recap, one of those last points of what Brendan was saying was, we should have unity, not uniformity. And I think we're all here for the same reason, unless there's anybody that's super pro-abortion. I doubt they're going to listen to an hour and a half long webinar though, are they? So we're all here for the same reason. Like, we want to save human lives. And so, let's be encouraged that we're all here for the same purpose and that we're all on the same mission in New Zealand. I think it's so cool that we can have so many people actually come along to a webinar on a Thursday evening and discuss these topics. So thank you so much everyone for coming along. We appreciate it. I hope it's given you something to think about. And we're always happy to have chats and stuff like that, so feel free to reach out. But most of all, I just encourage you to have conversations with those around you, your colleagues, your friends. I think even now, just all the stuff that's coming up on social media, after Charlie Kirk's passing and stuff like that, dialogue is important, and dialogue is really, 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 really important. And so I hope that you haven't felt like I'm trying to shut down dialogue tonight, because I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to keep things moving because I'm also conscious of the time, and don't want to keep people up until midnight. But keep these discussions happening and have conversations with your friends. But let's keep the pro-life movement unified and realize that we're all working towards the same goal and same vision. So yeah, I don't know. Did you have any other words that you wanted to add to that, Brendan? And then let's wrap up.
No, I just endorse that. Let's stay unified, team. We can have disagreements, and even unity is not we're all just of the same mind. Even a real unity, I think, is found in that kind of disagreement. And I think let's keep being and showing that authentic, genuine friendship that is a profound model to a world that desperately needs that. Let's not put our political positions before the human dignity of other persons. Because if we can't do that amongst ourselves, then, man, we don't have a hope of doing that out there to people who are outside of our movement. And then other than that, Lydia, if I know Daniel and maybe one or two others did want to hang around and have a dialogue, if you want to keep the Zoom open, I'm happy just for a bit longer, maybe another 10, 15 minutes or so. I'm happy to have a chat with people if they want to after we've closed up. So
that's cool. Perfect. Well, look, we'll wrap it up. Brendan's going to stay on, obviously, and chat more if anyone wants to, and otherwise, let's wrap up it. So feel free to leave the Zoom whenever you want, and then go for gold. Grace, if you wanted to
recording stopped.
If you wanted to leave, Grace, and you wanted to assign me as the admin, feel free to do that. So anyway, opening back up for discussion if anyone wants to, but officially the Zoom is over.
think that's Daniel. His hands up.
Yeah, Daniel and Ethan both do.
Oh yeah, well, I'll give it to Ethan first. I'll put my hand back up. Go ahead, Ethan.
Good on you, Daniel.
Hey, thanks again. Like, I think the discussion is very good and engaging. Brendan, just listening to you guys chatting, I don't know, Daniel, but I feel like I understand the question he's asking.
Sure.
I think like the point he's getting at is he's giving the example of race and you're talking about age. And I think the question is like, what is the principled difference there? Because I noticed when you were talking about the reason why you wouldn't support a racial ban on abortion, it's because you use the language, you said, because if I did, then I would be supporting the murder of certain races. But why doesn't that same principle apply with age? Where so can someone have the good intention of wanting to reduce the total number of abortions by supporting a ban on Māori abortions, for example?
So here's to go back to that point. I've brought a whiteboard out to help. It's got to that stage of the evening, and I think this is important to understand about the Christian moral tradition is how we arrive at a particular outcome. So you obviously have the outcome itself that you're trying to achieve. And in this case, my point was that I would support a ban on abortion after 20 weeks as an incremental step, not the end step, but just as the first step along that journey. And the outcome, the first major outcome would be that there'd be a reduction in the total number of abortions. And another outcome of it also would be, I believe that it would be of benefit to society because there would be at least some line, not the correct one and not the perfect one, but there would be a line drawn in the sand recognizing that there is actually human life in the womb. As it currently stands, that is just not recognized in law, and that has impacts, sociological impacts upon society and conscience as well. So, but the big one is the total reduction. There'd be a reduction in the amount of victims.
Yes.
So let me explain this. So this is important though. So
yes.
Now, when we compare that with, well, what if we had a race-based thing and we said that you're only allowed to abort Māori babies because that would bring down the total number of abortions as well. So same outcome, but this is the key part. My intention matters. That's the second part. What am I intending to do? And also, even more importantly, what is let's call it the means that I use or the method? How am I getting to that outcome? And so the outcome is less victims. And one way of getting there is by saying that I will use the method of racial killing, the acceptance of racial killing. That is an evil method to try and achieve that outcome. The other way, which is the one I would support, is I will support the method of actually placing a limit on how late into a pregnancy abortion can be. And that one is not an intrinsic evil in and of itself. Even if it achieves the same outcome, the way I get there is very different. And I think that's key to understand. That's the Christian moral tradition.
I understand what you're saying. And I think the point Daniel was making is that when you talk about age, you frame that as placing a limit on abortion. But when you talk about race, you frame that as supporting the murder of certain races. But why can't you frame them in the same way and then it be principally the same? So, for example, I'm
because
someone...
it's not, they're not. You can go back to that point just a second, but they're not the same. This is the key. That even if the outcome is the same, I'll give you another example. We could reduce poverty in New Zealand by bringing in really good economic policies and helping people who are living below the poverty line to actually get employment, for example. And that's a positive way, a good means. Another way someone could propose is, well, what if we legalize the killing of all people who earn less than minimum wage? Well, if we did that, then there'd be a whole lot less poverty as well. But the means I've used to get there has to be considered. It's not just the overall total outcome. It's how
I definitely understand what you're saying there. And part of what I was trying to get at is, so I'm Samoan, Pacific Islanders and Māori have been disproportionately harmed by abortion.
Yes.
Maori Pacific Island women get abortions at much higher rates than New Zealand women. So supposing my intention was to reduce abortions, the outcome I want is less abortions with the goal of all abortion being illegal. But my method of getting there is saying Maori have been most harmed by abortions. So let's incrementally get rid of those first, and then Samoans, and then Tongans, and then eventually we'll get to the New Zealanders at the end. How is that different in principle to incremental age gaps? So why is banning Māori abortions somehow supporting white abortions, but banning post-20-week abortions isn't in principle supporting pre-20-week abortions?
Because the difference is what you're asking me to do now is to actually prioritize the saving of lives based on race. And I don't think that's the same. I don't think you can say that that is the same moral character as simply saying that I support bringing the ceiling down on the upper limit. I think it's a very different thing now when you're being asked to say that you will give your stamp of approval. See, this is what I was saying earlier. Not all incremental strategies would be considered acceptable to an incrementalist, even if they might reduce a total reduction in the number. Because I would be asked to give my support to a proposal that would say it's actually okay to kill certain races, but not others. I could not endorse that methodology.
Is it possible that perhaps the reason why racial discrimination is more reprehensible to you than age discrimination is because of the cultural zeitgeist in which we live, where race is the evil thing, like racism is the evil thing, but murdering babies is not considered so evil? Like my question is it possible that you're influenced by the spirit of the age a little bit on this point?
Equally possible for any of us. I mean, anybody who lives in a culture is going to be a frog swimming in a pot. But I would like to think that I am making a principled position here, and I'm making a distinction. Again, this is where, so I've mentioned obviously outcome and methodology, the means I've used to get there, but also what is my intention here? And I think that matters as well, because I think if I gave my support to a law that said, well, you can kill certain races but not others, I'd have an issue with that. Now, maybe people can call me out on that, and they could say, hey, well, maybe principled position, there is a bit of an issue there. You know, could you make a case potentially that you are incrementally, if you're moving towards a reduction in the amount of killing or the victim classes? I'd be willing to entertain that possibility. I don't think though that I'm not convinced that would hold, but in saying that, I don't think that changes the overall proposition that an incremental strategy is still morally permissible.
I just think the word you're looking for there, Brendan, is partiality. It's showing partial judgment. That's the difficulty. And you're a clever guy. You're an intellectually smart guy, I believe. So just stay consistent, right? Outcome is the same. The intention is the same. But my method is not to use ageism, but to use racism. And you find that, wrong. Okay, good. But how come you can't apply the same logic to age?
Because I'm not using ageism, I'd argue.
Yeah, I think you're a clever guy, and I've seen you debate other people, and I think you're very clever. And I think that you probably can see the problem that if I had the right intention, the same outcomes as you, but I was going to use age. Just say I was in a different culture where racism wasn't as bad as ageism. Well, then it would be morally right. Then I think that's the problem that you. I feel for you because you're kind of stuck in a problem.
No, there's a big problem here. The distinction, you're not taking into account other factors. You're assuming that it's age that's the factor just because it's, say, a 20-week cutoff. There could be other factors that someone is using to.
How old is the baby?
Yeah, it's 20 weeks, right? But there might be someone who is saying to themselves, "Oh, I think viability is the cutoff
this is the problem that I see too. Like if I'm a father, I just got a daughter running out of this, in and out of this meeting, bro. And if a guy comes into my house, right, and he says, listen, I'm here to murder your whole family. And I say, listen, take my 2 youngest daughters. Am I a good father or a bad father, Brendan?
No, because you've willingly committed them to be killed. That's different. And I'm not doing that. And that's
I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to protect these 3 other people here, but I'm not going to protect those 2 babies.
No, again, that's not what a person who votes for a bill like that is doing. You got to recognize you're participating now. You have a proximate cooperation, I would argue, in a direct evil there. That's different.
But Christians vote, Brendan.
Yeah, and I would argue that what you're doing there is you're talking about a willing act as opposed to someone who's not doing the same thing. The proximity to the act is different.
It's an interesting argument.
Can I ask a totally different quick? Can we maybe move on from that, because I do want to actually discuss that with you later, Brendan, if that's cool. Unless someone has another burning aspect to that question. I had a different question.
All I wanted to say was, Brendan, thank you for listening to me. I feel like you really listened to me. I'll be praying for you and your ministry, and I really respect that you did listen. You took seriously what I was saying, and I think this sort of conversation is good, needs to happen. So thank you. But over to you, Daniel.
Ethan. Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, I agree.
So Daniel, yes, and then Mike's also got a question. So
Okay. Well, just briefly then, Brendan. I tried to ask you during our slight discussion, when Christians vote for a law that would cut off, that's saying we don't want any abortions, but you're limiting it to 20 weeks. Okay, we will vote for this law because that will save some babies. Are we not? You spoke in your presentation about the law being a pedagogue, like a teaching tool. Are we not teaching society that there's a difference between a 19-week-old baby and a 21-week-old baby, so much so that if you kill the younger one, you will not be prosecuted. You will be absolved of any consequences according to the law. And how can Christians support a law doing that?
Look, I agree with you that at the heart of it, there is a flaw there, the law. But then the flip side, you got to recognize, as the law is a pedagogue, if you've got an extreme abortion law that says you can kill up to birth, that's teaching something even worse. And so what we can do is the movement of virtue, Christianity and Christian moral philosophy has always recognized this, that there is a movement of virtue. We see this in God's plan of salvation from a Christian perspective. The Jewish people are brought closer and closer to the truth. There are things we read about in the Old Testament that God didn't want happening, but he tolerated as the movement towards a more faithful living out of the truth is taking place. And that is the reality of Christian moral philosophy as well. And so we would say that in one example, the law is teaching an extreme version of that evil, that there is no humanity of the unborn child. It doesn't count at all. It has no rights. It's okay to kill it right up to, and in our law, even during birth, if you could find an abortionist willing to do that. And if we say, well, I can't tolerate that, I've got to begin helping my society move away from that evil lie, then to support a 20-week restriction would be actually teaching them something new. And the something new that I am teaching, again, this would be the intentionality factor here, is that I am teaching them that, yes, there is a human being in there. There is humanity. It's not okay to do that. Now, does that mean that's the end of the lesson? No. We've got to keep teaching another lesson and keep that movement of virtue and that movement towards truth happening. And also, I think a factor we do need to think about in this is the ability that we actually have to achieve, say, one outcome versus another. Because the reality is that
Brendan, have faith.
The reality is that a 20-week ban might not even be achievable.
They won't accept it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I got no problem with that. But there may come a time when they will accept it. The reality is that if they're not going to accept the 20-week ban, abolitionism ain't happening either. So you're in a no man's land at that point.
So you said like God moved the Israelites towards truth gradually, but
he brings them on a journey.
Yeah, but God would never say you can commit evil here on your way towards truth, right?
No, he doesn't endorse the evil. You're right. He doesn't. And he's not, that's not what you're being asked to do here. You're not being asked to endorse the evil.
And you're not being asked to
what-
actually be the abortionist. You
Right,
know, like
right.
you're not.
But we are being asked to say to the culture, hey guys, murdering a baby after 21 weeks, that's just evil, okay?
Mm.
But we won't worry about these other ones. Like we're
No,
going to
no,
segregate.
think about, again, if we
Segregate.
go back to intentionality, it would go like this. Someone said to me, why are you supporting that law? And I'd say, because I think it's evil to kill unborn children. There's no way of achieving total abolition of abortion. So therefore, I've got to support this law because I can save some lives by supporting this law. I'm not saying to you, I support this law because I think it's okay to kill children under 20 weeks. That would be a wrong intention. And see, that's the key difference. Intentionality does matter.
We wouldn't be saying, okay, sweet, there's now a 20 week ban or limit. Let's now support the rest of the abortion law. No, we don't support the rest of the abortion law. We still want it completely gone. But we're just supporting.
We are saying you will be prosecuted at this stage if you do this, but you will not be prosecuted if you murder these ones.
Yeah, so there's the state's saying that, look, here's another analogy that might help possibly explain it. If you're living in a slavery society, that's what William Wilberforce did, for Pete's sake. He couldn't stop the slavery when he wanted to. It was several decades later. But what he did do was he supported a law that reduced the total number of slaves that could be carried on a slave ship. He's trying to bring a movement towards virtue. He's trying to get society to recognize that these are human beings. And how do you do that? With that first little movement, by saying, well, you don't crowd them together and treat them like cattle. Why? Because they're not. And that's beginning a movement. It's a further awakening of society. Then that allows you several decades later to get to the point where you say, you know what? Remember that lesson we started with? Now let's complete it. They're not cattle. You can't own them either. And so that movement of virtue is essential. That intention is absolutely part of it. So William Wilberforce was not saying, I'm okay with slavery. Not at all. He kept fighting against it the whole time, but he supported that bill because he knew that it would bring about an increase in humanity, even if there is still to be achieved.
My last question before we hand over to Mike. Sorry, Mike. Just following on from your parallel.
I've enjoyed the conversation, by the way, Daniel.
Yeah, me too. What William Wilberforce was doing there and improving conditions for the slaves is similar to someone saying, you're allowed to kill, like any abortions that happen, you have to give anesthetics first. So you're not ripping the babies apart without anesthetic. So that's the parallel, not the parallel of saying 21 weeks and above is illegitimate, under 20 weeks is not going to be prosecuted.
I'd have to disagree with you there because it's not. No, it's a direct parallel because in actual fact, like you're saying, okay, over 20 weeks, not allowed to do that. Over 100 slaves on a ship, I can't remember the exact number, let's say it was 100, over 100, you're not allowed to do that. That's not you saying I'm okay with slavery as long as you only have 80 people on a ship. It's not what that is. And that's the key. It's really important to understand that. It goes back to intention, and it's also about an increase of humanity in a culture that's currently missing that humanity. You haven't got the complete picture yet. But you are introducing more virtue and humanity into a very dark place. That's the key.
Thank you, Brendan. Mike.
It's not so much a question, but just a comment on something, actually, Lydia, that you talked about. We need to be engaged. And I have a professor, I'm an academic in Auckland University. I had a professor colleague from Indiana who used to be a Christian. He turned away for various reasons, and he was totally pro-choice, standard academic sort of pro-choice view, until he saw a picture of an aborted baby. And do you know what? It completely changed him to being totally pro-life. So I guess I'm sharing is not so much a question, but the need to be salt and light. We have got a bounden need to do exactly, Brendan, and what you and Lydia have talked about, is to be engaged with people. The other thing, because I love to pray, I think that we need to undergird this whole movement with prayer, and dare I say it, prayer and fasting. How serious are we? And I'm just moved constantly to almost to tears, actually. In Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, God says, "My people have sacrificed their children in the fire. It never occurred to me that they would do that." the heart of God. We've got to be moved, I think, by the heart of God and his compassion for a sinful world, as well as arguments in terms of legal procedures. Anyway, I'm just sharing my heart.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. You're right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all you're doing.
And in that regard, can I say too, Mike and anybody else who's still here, please forgive me if tonight I have not shown as much love and grace as I should have.
No, Brendan.
Model of Christ. I've strived, but maybe at times I've slipped, so I'm just human. But yeah, it's I think you're absolutely right on that point, Mike.
Oh no, Brendan, I'm not suggesting that for a minute. Your talk.
No, I didn't think you were. I just came to mind.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I think it's good to have discussion and robust discussion. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? Is that all right? Would there be a chance to have a longer conversation about this? Because there are a lot of things that I would like to pick Brendan's, brain on. Because I think he's a very intellectually honest person. It would be good to think these things a bit deeper through. Because if we're going to name one thing I always confused about, why do you call it the intentional killing of an innocent human being? Isn't the simple word for that murder?
Yeah. Look, you could technically murder is actually a legal technical term, and so homicide or feticide would be more correct terms. But I get the point you're making. But intentional killing is what murder is, as opposed to unintentional killing. So that's the distinction I draw, because it's an important one. That's
do
why.
You think that the intentional killing of a human being, however you guys phrase that, do you think that that's sin?
Oh yeah. If you intentionally kill someone, absolutely, you have done the gravest evil that you can to the very image of God by doing that. It is the sin that cries out for justice. It's just it really is that simple. So there's no equivocation for me on that point.
Amen. So do you then think the answer is Jesus?
To what question?
To sin.
To every question. Yeah, of course.
Sin.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you walk me through, the logic, the thing that probably I think underpins the presuppositions that are really guiding, I think, pro-life decisions is, why don't you guys talk about Jesus? It doesn't matter what the Muslim thinks. Doesn't matter what the atheist thinks. Hold on 1 second. Because if you are a person that believes that Jesus is the answer, then it doesn't matter what they think. They're wrong.
Yeah, look, I have no problem talking about Christ. I'm a faithful follower who gets up every morning early to spend time communing with him for that very reason. And I strive to do my best and to give my humble efforts to him in the most faithful way I can, imperfect as that is.
Why was he not mentioned tonight?
Well, he was mentioned tonight.
Where?
Where?
In the presentation, where was...
Let me go back, Josh, before you jump ahead, let me go back and let's just address that point you just raised.
Yeah.
So the point that I need to respond to here is that there is also quite clearly a strategic and pastoral prudence in the way that we have those evangelistic conversations or outreach conversations. And the simple truth is that the deliberate killing of an innocent human being, which obviously is a sin, and the answer to sin obviously is Christ, but it's also a violation of the very natural law that God has baked into the world as we know it. And so what that means is that I can have a conversation with someone about in that first step in that process through the natural law doorway that doesn't necessarily begin with a conversation about theology or Christ. My hope is that we would be able to end there in that conversation, but it might not be the starting point. And that's okay. There is a certain strategic prudence in the way some of these conversations unfold. If I'm talking to a Christian, it's going to be very different than if I'm talking to someone who has no faith, but who has a functioning conscience and can at least agree with me on that first point that killing is wrong. And then I step them through from there.
So would you agree that the people on the call tonight were all Christians?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Well,
some obviously were, and I'd imagine a portion, but I don't know if all.
That, probably the people that are on this call are pro-life Christians. And so would it not track that if that's true, right? Or even if it wasn't true, I would even say, that can you bed the idea of incrementalism within the Word of God?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
So a
Because
man comes up to
you
you,
can
a
be,
man, a
you
man
can be,
comes up to you, a man comes up to you, right? And he says, "Hey, I've just been caught in adultery. I'm cheating on my wife 5 days a week."
Mm.
Would you say, okay, well, let's just stop cheating on Monday and Thursday?
I would say to him, stop cheating.
I sound like an abolitionist, brother.
Yeah, but again, it's about context.
No,
So
it's about naming it as sin, Brendan.
no.
How
It's
much
still in
sin?
both.
How much sin should should the law that we're promoting have in it?
Yeah.
Brendan? It's
Who
zero sin.
who governs the behavior of that man I'm conversing with?
Say that again.
Who governs the behavior of that adulterous man I'm conversing with? Who governs his behavior?
Who governs his behavior? So if he was a Christian, you'd give a different answer than if he was a non-Christian.
Oh, I'd probably frame it differently, but the same answer would be given: stop cheating
Okay.
on your wife.
Stop cheating
But
on your wife.
the point is this: who governs his behavior? In that scenario, it's not the state. The law doesn't intervene. He has been given the freedom to actually commit adultery or to be faithful. So the way that conversation and the way the strategic response is going to be different
Yeah.
to a situation of a question of a law. And
So
what I
then
can do
when
about a law.
yeah, okay. And this is
You
where,
see what I mean?
yeah, I know, I totally get what you mean. I understand different spheres, personal, I understand what you're talking about, personal sin. But let's just talk it, okay, now we're talking about state sin. Okay, we're talking about state-sanctioned murder.
Yep.
And as we sit there, how should we as Christians, right? You're a Christian, I'm a Christian. We believe in Jesus. We believe in his morality. Should we tell the state to cheat Monday and Thursday? Oh, sorry, not to cheat Monday and Thursday? Or should we tell them, don't cheat? Because the Lord said so.
Yeah, that's right. We should tell them not to do evil things, or we should, well, we don't have authority over them, but we should plead with them not to do evil things.
So why would
Would
we
I be
plead
able
for
to
them
just to
to
speak to
cheat?
Josh for a moment?
Hold on. So why would we ask them to cheat then? When
But
we,
no,
when
no,
we, when we probably, when we,
no, we're not.
okay,
We're not
so
doing.
not to cheat. Sorry, I'll frame it. So not to cheat on Monday and Thursday,
That's
because
not what I'd be
that's
doing.
what. But when you say we're going to sign a law that has partiality baked into it, and if you read, if Isaiah 10 verse 1, right, it talks about iniquitous decrees.
Yep.
And that's what that is.
Yeah,
Because hold on, Brendan. It's because it has partiality baked into it by saying this: the 20-week and above, or whatever age group you're talking about, you're not allowed to move them. We're going to agree with that law. We're going to do that law. And that is basically saying Monday, Thursday.
No, it's not. You got to get back to intentionality. If I said to you, I'm voting
my
for this
intention,
law,
hold on, my intention is for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
No. If I said to you, I'm voting for this law because I support the killing of children under 20 weeks, that's a bad intention.
No,
if I'm voting for this law because I want to introduce humanity and
framing
save
it
more
like I'm
lives.
dumb, and then I said that. I didn't say that, Brendan.
No, Josh, that's not what I'm saying at all, and I don't think that's reasonable, actually.
No. Oh, yeah. Well,
I'm definitely not trying to say that at all.
Because
what I'm trying to say is there's different intentions.
Then deal with what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you are saying we're going to save the 20-week and above. Okay. That is saying don't cheat Monday, Thursday. It's the same logic.
That's not. It's not the same logic. Because what I'm saying to you is that in that situation, that scenario with the law, my intention is not, I'm okay with you doing this evil thing under some circumstances. That's not my intention of voting for that law. That's so key. It's so essential that in actual fact, if my intention was that is a problem. But if my intention is that I'm voting for this law to actually increase and improve humanity,
What if
reduce
my intent is to get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but for today, I'm going to get Monday and Tuesday.
To do what? Sorry?
So, okay. I hope you're seeing what I'm saying. You're saying, right? let me just go straight from the cheating, okay, and also the national sin of abortion. And you're saying 20 weeks, right, and above. And then over here, we've got a guy that's cheating on his wife 7 days a week, and you're going to go and just say, okay, let's just stop Monday, Tuesday for now. We've got the idea of Monday to Sunday, but let's just start Monday and Tuesday now. Do you not see the fallacy of a Christian coming to sin and treating it incrementally in any sphere? We're not to treat sin incrementally in any place. And so and I think this, Brendan, this is why I want you to get this. Is this not about, you said before something like, hey, if partiality doesn't work, then what do you think will happen to abolitionism? Well, I believe there's a God that rules and reigns from above. He sends rain, he sends sunshine, he sends judgment, and he sends blessing. And when we don't follow him and do it his way, you have to think to yourself for a second, Brendan, whether you're that God that's going, these people are being partial. Why would I bless it? And for 21 years, you've been in reverse, brother. You've been going reverse the other direction. And you got to be asking, is God bringing the blessing? Is God turning this nation around? I believe
Josh,
he
I
is
think I think that's a little bit harsh, actually quite harsh, to say that Brendan has been going in reverse for 21 years. I'm sorry. Brendan has committed his life to the pro-life movement and has done
He started
so
at
much.
8 weeks, we're at 40.
That wasn't Brendan's doing.
No, I'm not saying it is.
What
I'm
have
just
you been
saying
doing for the
it's
pro-life
when
movement?
the
to
church
stop it?
doesn't behave like the salt and light that Mike spoke about before. When we're not being salt and light, when we're not behaving like God has told us to behave, then you know what? I don't think God's still going to heaven going, you know what? I'm going to bless that. I'm going to bless
Yeah,
all
but
that
you know what?
iniquitous.
There's also abolitionists that have been working the same amount of time in New Zealand, and we've also gone from 8 weeks to 40 weeks. Like you can frame it both ways.
Tell me those
I
abolitionists.
think
Tell me their names.
Here's a key thing to think about. The collapse of Western Christendom under the Roman Empire happened after the widespread Christianization of culture. And the church was doing its best, but there were other factors at play. And I think that you've got to recognize that as well. Now, I'm not saying that the church has not been guilty of not speaking up enough. Got no problem there. But there is a whole nother movement of history going on and a whole lot of other cultural factors that are at play as well. And I think it's important to recognize that too.
Could I just speak into it just a little bit, guys? It's been really interesting listening to you both. But from my personal perspective, my understanding is Voice for Life was formed over 50 years ago to inform and educate everybody, all of the nation. It wasn't set up as a church. It was formed to educate and inform people about the horrors of abortion and about the sanctity of life of the unborn human child. And it just so happens that faith-based people are sailing on that ship, mainly. And I don't know whether you guys have had an opportunity to be overseeing what some of the branches do, but there's probably stuff going on that you don't know about. Like I know when we go out on the street where I live, we do our outreaches, we use our baby models, and mainly people that I'm talking to are not of faith. And so we're seeing people's minds and hearts turn, even though they're not people of faith, because seeing is believing, and we inform and educate, and we explain to them, we listen to them, and we don't judge them. All that type of stuff is happening. But the other thing that I'd like to mention that you might not be aware of is that we're also the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff with the women who and men who have been harmed by abortion. And we currently have a biblical-based Christ-centered study that we're offering women and men all over the country, whether they're Christians or not, but it's completely biblical based. And so Jesus is, in fact, the God factor is woven into what we do, but our primary purpose is to educate and inform every single person. So, what I've been hearing is that you've been saying that God is out of the equation when he's not. I mean, I could confidently say that most of the people that I've met who are in the Voice for Life movement share their faith. I know when I've been able to form relationship with someone by talking to them about things like abortion, I ultimately share my faith with them. It leads to telling them about God, that we're made in his image. So please don't think that nothing is happening spiritually. Please don't think that branches aren't praying. Please don't think that, because that's not the case.
Well, that's not what I said either.
So I just want to leave that with you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff that does involve the Lord happening across the Voice for Life organization.
Awesome.
Just to add to that, Gina, too, I think when you think about the question of evil in the world, the atheist would want to say, "Oh, well, I see evil all around me, so therefore there is no God." And I think we want to be careful of falling into a similar sort of trap here, because one thing to consider is how much worse would it be if there weren't actually faithful Christian pro-lifers out there striving and toiling away? It could be a whole lot worse. So
I don't know how it could be worse for the baby.
Oh yeah, it could be a lot worse in our culture. So the reality is
60,000 babies a year being murdered.
Yep, and it could be a lot higher. It's been higher. And there are also a lot of babies that are now being saved by pro-life efforts as well.
It's been higher than 60,000.
16,000 is where we are
60.
at.
It's 60.
No, we're not 60 yet. We're not that
yes,
high.
We are. Well, what's IVF?
Okay, well, if we wanted to include IVF, but still, if we look at the abortion figures primarily, the abortion figures in this country have been higher than what they are now.
Do you think, like Christian, one thing I'm interested in, Christian mothers that do IVF where they make 10 babies, kill 9 to keep 1, or maybe freeze 2, keep 1, kill 7. Do you think that's murder?
I don't want to get into the IVF topic, but in actual fact, yeah, I'm opposed to IVF. So for several moral reasons, including the destruction of innocent human embryos. But I don't. This is not really.
Would you be willing to say it's the intentional killing of a human life?
If someone intentionally did that, the doctor's intentionally doing that. Sure, the couple may not realize. So, but the point is that there may be people who are on this call who maybe didn't come here expecting to have that conversation. And I don't want to ambush anyone. But I will say, yeah, I am morally opposed to.
Would you change your mind on the 16 to 60 because of that stat?
Well, if we included IVF,
yeah,
sure.
Why? What? Yeah, I'm interested. Why is that not like if you think about 16 and then you think about the other 44,000 babies that are being murdered? How come, your pro-life organization doesn't talk about the other 44?
What do you mean doesn't?
Because
I mean, I do. The focus of
abortion.
Yeah. And Voice for Life does, when it's asked, has in the past has talked about and tackled the issue. In fact, they made a submission on the treatment of human embryos some years ago when that was before the law. They've been very clear about the fact they don't support the destruction of human embryos, and I'm very clear in my work. I've actually been asked regularly to present to groups on this topic. So yeah, there are people clearly in the pro-life space. More could be done, sure. But I'm not going to take the blame for that because I'm only one man. And I can only do so much, brother. That's all there is. It's the reality of it.
I think there's also, instead of just pointing a finger and saying, hey, why isn't Voice for Life doing it? Why don't we also look at, hey, what is Voice for Life actually doing? And there's only so many people, so many hours. And I think if you look at a lot of the people that are volunteering, I mean, I look at our exec team, for example, and I know that most of us are working full time and volunteering a lot of hours each week out of our own free time and time away from our families and friends and all of that kind of stuff to do pro-life work. And there's only so many hours. And I know for a fact that Brendan works so incredibly hard, and I endorse his work and I appreciate it so much, but there's only so many hours in a day that one man can do. And so if IVF is something that you're really passionate about and want to speak up about, like, I encourage you, like, do something about it, because there is room for that conversation in New Zealand, and someone needs to pick up that flag and start talking about it.
Yeah, no,
but it doesn't necessarily need to be Brendan.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm not. I just said to Brendan just before, so fair enough. You know, busy man. But do you guys know who I am?
No,
Josh.
I don't.
No.
Yeah, I know who you are,
Yeah.
Josh.
So I'm going to be starting a political party, right? God Defend NZ, and we live in a nation where we, you know, we kill our babies and ask God to defend us every time the All Blacks play. It's a
Excellent point.
and
Mm.
I'm conflicted about who do I vote for in a nation where basically every political party is committed to the murder of innocent little preborn babies. And I think when you weigh God's law, the worst thing that's happening in this nation is abortion. And I want to start a party that just does one thing. One thing, not 10 things, one thing. And we're going to preach the gospel unto the issue of abortion. Now, when I preach the gospel, just like Brendan said before, I've got to say Monday to Saturday, you can't cheat on your wife. And so I'm going to say, hey, all abortions are going to be illegal. And we're going to use whatever political capital we have to eliminate abortion. Would you guys support that?
What do you mean?
think
Vote for you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
yes,
vote.
I would.
Vote.
Well,
I think we
have
should
you?
vote with prudence and look at the likelihood of a party, like Brendan was saying earlier. I hope I'm not misquoting you, Brendan, but look at the likelihood of, is a party going to get in, and otherwise is a large. I'm just speaking personally, not on behalf of Voice for Life. Just for the record, there's so many. Personally speaking, there's so many minor parties at the moment that I don't know necessarily how many of these minor parties are going to get in.
You know the minor parties that preach the gospel.
Mm.
Name the minor parties that preach the gospel, that have an absolute, hey, the person that's in the womb is a person to the Lord Jesus Christ. And
Well, there have been minor parties like that, Josh. Do you remember the one party?
I'm saying, is there a political party now, Gina?
No.
And
But
my
do
question would be,
you remember the one party?
huh?
Do you recall the one party, a Christian party back for 2020?
I'm not trying to recall, and I'm trying to be respectful here, but I'm trying to say, I'm starting a political party now. Like, I don't want to go in the weeds of what happened in the past, but
But they did what you're speaking about now. It was completely Christian. Jesus was the center of it, and they were a minor party. One of the difficulties we have in our country is our MMP system. And the other thing that emerges with that is we have a very apathetic woke church. The church mainly, not all, but mostly are uninformed, and leaders from the pulpit don't educate their people and bring these issues to the church community about these issues that we've been talking tonight.
And Gina, what Lydia said before is really true. Like, when you talked about the pastor on the plane or whatever, like, I'm with you, sister. And I would say the culture is the report card of the church. And right now, the reason why the culture is pathetic, Brendan and Lydia, I think you guys would agree with this, is because the church is pathetic. And my question is, then again, back to, I know Brendan's a busy guy.
All of the
Lydia's
church,
a busy guy.
Josh, not all of the church.
I didn't say
There
all of the church.
there is the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Josh, I have listened to you. There's the body of Christ that is not that way.
Yep.
And so what I learned, because I stood for politics back in 2019, and the church proved where they were going to tick, what box they were going to tick. And what I've learned is that the mission for me is to change the hearts and minds of the people. At the moment, I don't see with the MMP system the minor parties, unless they unite, let's say all of them unite, which hasn't happened, I don't see any of them getting over the 5% threshold.
Yeah, and if they
And
all
so-
united, Gina, the problem would be is that abortion would be the bottom of the list.
No, it wouldn't. I don't
Okay,
agree
so
with
to name the 9 minor parties.
Pardon?
Name the minor parties that can work together.
Josh, here's my response. If you could show me that you're a man of character, that you're a man who has the skills, the necessary leadership skills, and you have a good, humane policy, comprehensive policy approach, I wouldn't have any problem voting. So you got to earn that, though. I'm not just handing over my vote to anybody. You got to earn it.
So, but if you
that's my response.
Okay, then just so you hear that out loud. What about if you've got national, who's abortion up until birth, and then you've got me. Maybe I don't have the greatest character. Maybe I don't have a comprehensive plan that you would agree with, but I'm going to have one policy: abolish abortion in Jesus' name. What say you, bro?
Get that party together, bro. Get your 500 members, set up a party, and I'll.
Would you be one of those 500 members?
I wouldn't be, no, because I have a policy of not joining political parties because of my work. I think I need to be impartial.
So if I got the 500 members, would you vote?
You get there first, and I'll have a look at what you're offering.
So, but I'm just saying, theoretically, you could vote for national. Or
No, I don't. I've stopped voting for national long ago.
And what do you think about Simeon Brown?
He's a good man in a very difficult circumstance.
Yeah.
And he's working for a party that's committed to murdering babies up until birth.
Well, that's not the party commitment, but I'm proud to call Simeon a friend, and I will back his integrity. 7 days a week and twice.
If he goes around the nation, but if he goes around the nation,
have nothing to do with passing that law.
Saying, yeah, no, but if he goes around the nation saying vote for, just hear this part. I mean this respectfully. If he goes around the nation and he tells people to vote for national, how is that different from someone going around Nazi Germany telling people to vote for Nazi party?
Well, the National Party is not the Nazi Party. That's not a valid comparison. But yeah, and if you're talking about me, I don't tell people, I don't instruct them how to vote. I give them some basic principles if they were to ask, and then say that you've got to search your conscience and make a wise.
Can you use your logic that you're very sharp with to walk through how it's different when National is going to kill 60,000 babies this year, and Nazi Party killed a whole lot of people? If a Christian is to advocate for the Nazi Party, how is that different from advocating for the National Party?
Because they're not the same thing. They're just not the same thing. But let's consider that and walk that through.
Okay,
let's say that we've got national, and the only other viable option is we end up with a Labour, Greens, and more extreme version of Te Pāti Māori in power. Do you think that situation is going to improve, or do you think it's possibly likely to get worse?
Hey, Brendan,
that's got to be
this is the bit where the guy of character, whether you think I am or not, but the guy of character says, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start a political party.
Good man.
I'm just not going to.
And you know what? If you get public profile on this point, then it's going to help the pro-life movement, because it's going to open up a whole new conversation in society, and that's a good thing. So great. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Sweet.
I've got to get going.
Josh.
Yeah, you do. It's getting late.
I have to leave too.
Thanks, team.
I super appreciate Brendan on a day that is good, mate.
It's good. So, and sorry, as I said, I'm a little bit still on the tail end of a thing. I've got to get up early and speak to some students at a high school tomorrow all morning. So, but yeah, it's been great. I've enjoyed it, and I think you're right. It'd be good to have a space where we could actually get together and have a conversation about it. Yeah, good. Lydia, do you want to close us in prayer?
Sure, I can do that. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we can gather together. We thank you for conversation, for discussion, and for for your wisdom. We thank you for Brendan and for him and for his life that he is giving for the pro-life movement in New Zealand. We thank you for all that he has done over these past 21 years, and we know that he has really poured so much of his time and energy into this. And so we pray that you'll bless his work and continue to bless his work and be fruitful. Lord, we also thank you for the life of Charlie Kirk, and we thank you for what he has shared with the world and the conversations that he has started. We pray that you will bring up a revival for Christians and for new believers to turn to you. We thank you for his work, and we pray that you'll encourage Christians to have conversations about you, that may be their thing, and it's not just about freedom of speech, but that it's about sharing Christ. And we pray that you'll be with his wife and children as they mourn his loss, and so many more as well. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Good night,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody. Have
Thanks,
a good
you
night.
too.
Sleep.
Good
Good
night,
night,
everyone.
guys. Thanks.
God
God bless.
bless you.
Thanks
Bye.
for the up. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.